Hello dear participants. Now let's skip to module number 4.7, Climate and Environmental Projects in Public Procurement. Spotting corruption, unjustified modifications during contract implementation. So let's start with the reporting template. This webinar is designed to guide you through the monitoring process in a clear and structured way. It follows the same logic as the report for monitoring projects. The reporting template is divided into 3 steps. Step 1 is the desk analysis. This is where we review the contract information and also spot potential corruption risks. Step 2 focuses on the contract implementation, checking whether the project is being carried out as promised on the ground. And step 3 looks at results and impact, evaluating whether the outcomes match the objectives and serve the public interest. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on contract modifications and the corruption schemes that can arise from unjustified changes, often referred to as scope creep. We'll look at why these modifications matter, how they can undermine accountability, and what red flags supervisors should watch for. By understanding these risks, you'll be better prepared to spot irregularities early, strengthen oversight, and ensure that projects deliver what was originally promised. One of the most efficient methods for spotting red flags in public procurement is by directly observing what is happening at the construction site. It is here on the ground that discrepancies between contract terms and actual implementation become visible. Signs such as delays in progress, substitution of agreed materials, or unexplained changes in scope can all indicate potential risks. Careful monitoring ensures that the project remains transparent, accountable, and aligned with its intended purpose. By watching closely, we safeguard public resources and guarantee that the work, such as planting new greenery in our neighborhood, truly delivers value to the community and protects our environment. So what are the key signs of this kind of corruption? For instance, a lot of changes to the contract or big extensions, especially under subclause number 13 of so-called FIDIC contracts. Also, extra works that look like improvements, but not necessarily needed to finish the original job. Alternative or replacement works, where parts of the projects get swapped out or replaced. So now, please let me draw your attention to another interesting example. It's a real-life based example from Poland. A contract award procedure was announced and the contract was signed for thermal modernization and modernization of the police headquarters facilities. According to the Supreme Audit Office from Poland, as they controlled this area, when the municipality building was being modernized, some additional works were added on through an annex to the original agreements. These included things like retrofitting the boiler room, putting new plaster on one of the buildings, and also replacing the floors. The contractor was paid at least over 450,000 Polish zloty for these additional works, even though in reality they should have already been covered under the basic contract. The Supreme Audit Office from Poland also found, according to the report mentioned, that the municipality failed to calculate and collect contractual penalties from the contractor. At a minimum, these penalties should have been 3.3 million Polish zloty, but in reality, they should have exceeded 7.4 Polish million zloty. By not enforcing these penalties, the municipality caused a loss to the state treasury. So how to spot additional works and contractual penalties? First, look at the contract amendment notice. That's the official OJ notice. Then check the contract value and work out by how much it's gone up in percentage terms. To see if the increase makes sense, you can also use specialist publication and databases that list prices for materials, labor, and equipment. In Poland, for instance, you can look at price lists of commercial organizations like Sekocenbud, Intercenbud, or Orbud. Also, don't forget to review the contract itself to see what it says about penalties. Finally, if needed, carry out a site visit, but also keep in mind that this can require professional technical knowledge. So, what are some other suspicious actions during the contract implementation phase? One of the red flag is when the contracting authority lets people work on the contract who don't have the same level of experience or the proper authorizations that were required during the tender stage. Basically, the team they put forward isn't as qualified as the one they promised earlier. So how can you spot this? Go back and check the tender documents. Look at what qualifications and authorizations were originally required for the key staff. Review the questions that were asked during the tender stage. See if economic operators raised concerns about the contract terms being too demanding or out of proportion. Take a look at the annexes attached to the contract. If needed, reach out to the relevant institutions, for example, the ones that handle professional authorizations or certifications, to confirm the staff's credentials. Another thing that can raise red flag is when the contracting authority changes the contract by using very vague review clauses. So what can be changed in the contract, how it can be changed, and under which circumstances. If those clauses don't explain, for instance, how the value of the change will be calculated, it can look suspicious and potentially unfair. So how you can spot this? Step 1. Go back to the original tender documentation and the requirements in the contract. Check what the provisions of the contract actually said. Step 2. Look at the questions that were asked during the tender stage. See if economic operators had already noticed or raised concerns about those contract terms. And step 3. Get familiar with the annexes attached to the contract, or you can also reach out to the relevant institutions, like for instance those responsible for implementing and monitoring European Union funds. Another action that can raise suspicion during the contract implementation phase is when the contracting authority modifies the contract. For example, the contractor is replaced, but actually nobody checks whether the new contractor actually has the required capacities. And how can this be detected? You should go back to the tender documentation and the contract requirements, especially the part about professional capacities such as experience and staff qualifications. You can also look at the questions that were asked during the tender stage to see whether the economic operators paid attention to those requirements. And what's the other way to spot it? A good way is also to go carefully through the annexes and supporting documents attached to the contract. If something looks unclear, you can also reach out to the relevant institutions, like those, for example, responsible for overseeing the implementation and control of European Union funds, in order to verify this situation. In this case, this may be so-called managing authorities, intermediary bodies, or institutions implementing EU programs in a given EU member state, depending on how they have divided responsibilities related to the management and control system. In the case of Polish practice, for example, a separate institution has been designed to act as the audit authority. The audit authority in Poland for European Union funds is the head of the National Revenue Administration, so-called CAS, who serves within the Ministry of Finance. Also, another action that can raise red flag or arouse suspicion is when the contracting authority reaches a settlement with the contractor, and as part of that deal, the contractor agrees to deliver some extra equipment while the contracting authority waives its claims. This could look questionable. Obviously, in, for instance, Polish Civil Code, there's a concept called datio insolutum. It means that a debtor can free themselves from an obligation by offering something different from what was originally agreed. But in the context of a public procurement contract, this practice is problematic. Public contracts are supposed to follow strict rules and conditions set out in the tender. Allowing a contractor to substitute one performance for another, even if both sides agree, can undermine transparency, fairness, and equal treatment of other bidders. So while datio insolutum might be acceptable in private law, under public procurement rules, it can be easily seen as suspicious or even unlawful. As we can add, the Court of Justice of the European Union, in case number C-541, Finfronie, made it clear, once a public contract has been awarded, you cannot make a material amendment to that contract without starting a new tender procedure. And that rule applies even if the change comes in the form of a settlement agreement. So the key point is that the settlements which alter the substance of the contract, like adding new equipment or changing obligations, can be seen as unlawful modifications. They undermine transparency and fair competition, and that's why they arouse suspicion during contract implementation. Armed with this knowledge, individuals monitoring contracts or contract amendments can identify red flags, including all those previously mentioned, by analyzing information about contract amendment which are required by the European Union or national law. At the same time, in the case of project co-financed by European Union funds or other sources, it is highly recommended to inquire about or access data from the relevant institutions. Such funds for contract implementations are public funds, so they are our shared public funds, which should be spent transparently and in accordance with the law. Now it's time for a little quiz. Case study. A city signed a contract to restore a polluted riverbank. The plan was ambitious. Remove waste along the entire stretch of the river, plant native vegetation to stabilize the soil, and install barriers to prevent future dumping. But halfway through, the contract was modified. Instead of cleaning the whole riverbank, the contractor was asked to focus only on a small section near the city center. The planting of native species was reduced, and the barriers were never installed. So, in that case, do you notice any red flags for possible corruption scheme? Answer A. No, it just means that only this section near the city needed to be restored. Answer B. Yes, since the contractor cleaned out only part of the riverbank, the ecological restoration effect was not achieved. So take your time, please don't hurry, and I will give you 30 seconds to answer this question. So what's the correct answer? B. Why? Reducing the scope of the contract without proper justification meant the environmental effect was not achieved. Citizens can spot this by comparing the original contract with the actual work delivered. On paper, the contractor completed the new scope, but in reality, the environmental effect was lost. Pollution remained upstream, erosion continued downstream, and the river ecosystem wasn't restored. Citizens who compared the original contract with the scaled-down work could clearly see that the project no longer met its environmental goals. This is a corruption risk, unjustified contract modifications that reduce scope. It saves money for the contractor, but it wastes public funds and leaves the environment unprotected. So that's all for this module. By recognizing corruption red flags in climate and environmental initiatives, we can better safeguard public procurement. Also, thank you very much for engaging with this important topic. Also, Ms. Ewa Podorowska, expert in climate adaptation and environmental protection, and Mr. Przemysław Ostrowski, expert in public procurement, would like to kindly thank you for taking part in our training module. Thank you very much.